Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel, which, to remind you, is being webcast and live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Please can I remind members to switch their microphones on when speaking and to turn it off when they have finished speaking. And could I please remind members to switch off their mobile phones or at least put it into silent mode. Today, before we get into the meat of the agenda, we have apologies and substitutes. And we have had apologies from the panel's Deputy Chair, Councillor Pendleton, and Councillor Bridges is substituting for him. We've also had apologies from Councillor Ratalau-Govin, so Councillor Hunter is substituting for Ratalau. And so welcome to you both. It's also appropriate at this time. The panel's gone through a number of changes, obviously, with 2 new independent members joining us. So I think it's only right and appropriate we shoot round the table. For those members here representing a district, if you could, as well as saying your name, just please say which district you recommend, and that will be helpful to certainly the OPCC staff, I'm sure. So I'll start to my left as always.
I'm Michael Rickman, Councillor from Market Harborough.
Ruth Cammermile, Councillor from Hinckley and Bosworth.
John Bridges, Councillor from North West Leicestershire District Council.
Malleys Graham, Councillor Melton Borough. Thank you.
John Boyce, Soberby and Wixton.
Councillor Lee Brecken, Blaby District Council.
Brian Page, Councillor for Charnwood.
Alan Walters, Rutland County Council.
Simon Cole, Chief Constable.
Paul Dawkins, Temporary Chief Finance Officer for the PCC.
Craig Master, Deputy PCC.
Councillor Stephen Correll, Leicester City.
Councillor Sue Hunter, Leicester.
Councillor Abdul Osman, Leicester City.
Councillor Manjulas, who represents Leicester City Council.
I'm Veronisa Lalani, new independent member.
I'm Ewan Walters. I work in Democratic Services here at Leicestershire County Council, and I'm the Secretariat for the Police and Crime Panel.
And my name's Joe Orson, Leicestershire County Council. I think it's fair to say congratulate's the right word, to the 2 new independent members. I understand you went through quite a process, and we look forward to working with you over the coming 12 months, and maybe even longer, who knows. Significant change at that point, but that's all for the future. Moving on, minutes of the confirmation hearing held on the 5th of December, pages 3 to 6. I'll just go through for correctness. Page 3, anything? 4, 5, 6. Thank you, members. Minutes of the Police and Crime Panel meeting held on the 5th of December 2017, pages 7 to 12. Any queries, inaccuracies? Page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Okay, members, thank you very much. Moving back to the agenda. Public question time. I haven't been notified of any questions at all. That's confirmed by Ewan. I have been advised of an urgent item at number 4, and so I hand over to Manjula. Wait, I couldn't find you there, Manjula.
Thank you, Chair. As the panel is aware that there has been shocking news in the city, one of my constituents has been murdered. And Chair, publicly I would like to thank the police. The support they are giving to the family liaison officer, to the communities, and to the business community, and how many meetings they have held. And the channels of communications are open, that every step we are being informed, and to rebuild the confidence in the communities, because he was murdered very near his home. So I would like to say thank you to the police for deploying all your resources there. Thank you.
Firstly, well, thank you, Manjula. It's a pretty grim crime. There are now 3 people charged, which limits some of what I can say. There are 2 further people in custody. With the support of Crime Stoppers, we've just announced a reward of £10,000 for any further information. There's a community meeting this evening, which Roger Bannister, the Deputy Chief Constable, will attend along with a couple of senior colleagues. I think Keith Vaz is going as our local MP. I'm guessing you might be there as well. It is a really serious crime. I went in on Sunday morning and sat in on the briefing with the team, which is a really significant team who are working outstandingly hard. But we have had huge support from the local community, and all those things we talk about here and policing with, actually this is a with the local community, and we're very grateful for their support. Later on in your agenda, you've got some stuff about collaborations and what they do. All of our murder investigations are done by a collaborative team. Some of the officers who have come to join us for this investigation made a point of telling me that they couldn't believe how the overwhelming support that they'd had from local people everywhere they went, and so we're really grateful for the support. If you have any information or you know someone who has, call us or call Crime Stoppers, because we are still working. We still have people in custody, and even though there are people charged, there are still some things to resolve. So thank you for your kind words. I hope that what happens at a time of crisis reflects what we do other days. So thank you.
Willie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say thank you, Manjula, for what you've said. And as Police and Crime Commissioner, I've been kept very much informed. I sit on the Gold Group, although I wasn't at the Gold Group that you were present at. I think we'll be at one tomorrow. And I, too, have been incredibly impressed by the way in which the Leicestershire Force has reacted. But I've also been very impressed by the way in which the local community has reacted, not least you and your fellow councillors and the Member of Parliament. And I think the attitude that they've taken, if I may say so far, has been exemplary. And it says a lot for modern Leicester that we can deal with something as ghastly as this series of crimes in the way that we can. So thank you, Manjula, for raising it today.
Thank you very much, Lord. Thank you, Manjula, for raising that. Moving on to the item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda.
But I did. Okay. Declaration of interest for agenda item 6, which is about independent members. And also, I have a niece who's in the police cadets. So obviously it's relevant to the rest of the agenda items as well.
Similarly, item 6, clearly the independent members. And I also have 3 sons, 2 of whom, 3 in the police, 2 of whom are with the Leicester Force. So that's a run-in sort of thing.
If we note that both first standard item, definitely saves you having to reiterate it every time. Okay? Yep, thank you. Moving on to the first report, which is independent panel members, pages 13 to 16. This is the appointment of the independent co-opted members of the Police and Crime Panel. There is a recommendation to note the report at number 13, para, but I'm going to hand over to you and to present the report.
Yep, so panel members will remember that on 3rd of October 2017, the panel made a decision to commence a new recruitment process for independent panel members and to end the term of the previous independent members at the end of December 2017. So an appointment panel was set up comprising of councillors Brecon, Walters and Govind, and adverts were sent out through a variety of media, trying to encourage people to apply, and there was pretty good response from the public. So interviews were held, and the applicants were judged against the criteria, and a decision was made to appoint Mr Culverwell and Miss Lalani as the two independent members of the Leicestershire and Rutland Police and Crime Panel. So this report is just to inform you of the process that was undertaken and welcome our two new members to the panel. Thank you.
Any comments on this paper? I'm not going to go through paragraph by paragraph on this short paper. Nothing? Okay. I propose a recommendation 13. All okay? Yes. Thank you very much, members. Moving on to item 7, police precept and budget 17 to 50. Obviously, we'll have a presentation from the PCC and Paul Dawkins as well on this paper, but I will just remind members I will take each section, for example, page 17, the recommendation, ask any comments on the recommendations, then page 18, executive summary, and then it will go down to page 19, precept proposal. So if you've got any questions, just try and be one step ahead, because I don't like going back, because this paper should take a fair bit of discussion, I hope anyway, and trust. I also like to remind members that the panel may only veto the first precept that is proposed, which is the one that is before us today. Such a veto must be agreed by 2/3 of the total panel membership. So as this panel has 15 members, 10 members would be required to veto the precept. The panel must provide a report to the PCC on the precept to the PCC by the 8th of February. Now, in cases where the panel vetoes the proposed precept, the PCC must have regard to the report made by the panel and provide a response by the 15th of February, including a revised precept. The panel will need to give consideration to the revised precept that has been proposed, and for this purpose a further panel meeting has been scheduled for the 19th of February. The panel will then submit a report to the PCC on the revised precept. On receiving that report, the PCC can then issue the revised precept. So that's where we are. Lord Bark, I'm sure you want to introduce this paper.
Sorry, Chair, can I have a question prior? Mr Dawkins is here. I think it's only reasonable that somebody states why Mr Dawkins is here and is in as an interim, because clearly we as a panel normally would go through a confirmation hearing for the Chief Financial Officer. Now clearly this is a departure from the norm, and it would be wrong not to at least acknowledge why and how we got here.
Lord Bark, would you like to say where you are on the recruitment of the new finance officer?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Councillor Boyce for his comment. What happened was that the Chief Financial Officer, whom I think the panel knew well, left to go to Northamptonshire in the position of Chief Financial Officer at the, I think, second week in November, end of the second week in November. We're in the middle of budget making at the time. We very much needed financial advice, of course, in order to be able to produce the budget that's before you today. We thought the best thing to do was to appoint an acting Chief Financial Officer, and very kindly Paul Dawkins agreed to do that job along with the other jobs that he does as well. And I have to say that his and his team's assistance over the last couple of months is the reason why we have before you today the budget in the form that it is. If it hadn't been for their hard work and effort, we wouldn't have done that. Now, as far as recruiting a new finance officer is concerned, well, we have gone through the process and delighted to say that we have a candidate for that position. The panel chose someone to do that job, subject, of course, to the Police and Crime Panel hearing, and which will take place, hopefully, reasonably soon. That person has come into the office this week and has been doing some sort of early work to learn what the job of Chief Finance Officer is. I think that's also included talking to Mr Dawkins and his team as well. And as soon as the very last bit of the vetting process is through, then I know my office and Angela Perry will be asking for a hearing for the new Chief Financial Officer as soon as possible. So as we speak, my acting Chief Financial Officer is Mr Dawkins, and I think I've been extremely lucky to have his services for the last couple of months. Indeed, I don't know what I'd have done if I hadn't.
Obviously, John, you were at the preparatory meeting. We talked about the possibility of a conflict of interest between Mr Dawkins being the Force Finance lead and also the OPCC lead. As it is at this moment, Lord Bark didn't think there was any interest. Would you like to confirm that, Lord Bark?
Well, I can only say I haven't noticed any conflict of interest at all. Mr Dawkins, and so he can speak for himself, has advised me as Police and Crime Commissioner from the position of the OPCC into what should be and should not be included in the budget. I've taken the final decisions, of course, about that, and there's been no conflict of any kind. This is a temporary, very short temporary arrangement, which in the real world was sensible.
Thank you. The person that you are looking to appoint but haven't appointed as yet, can you confirm or not whether they are on the payroll at this moment in time?
On the payroll, it's a difficult question to answer because they've come in, and in fact, I'm going to ask my Chief Executive to come forward, if he may, on this, because obviously he's responsible for staff. I think the panel knows Mr Heinsohn from last time, and he can perhaps answer that question better than me.
Right. So there's the position that, and his name is Martin Henry. Martin Henry is in exactly the same position that I was in when I first appeared in early December. So on a familiarisation basis. But on that basis, yes, we do have to pay him. So we have to pay him for the days that he is working for us. But that is always pending the approval of this panel. So at this point in time, yes, for the days he works up until the time that the confirmation hearing happens, yes, he will be paid. And he will be paid at the rate he would be paid post-confirmation hearing, should you confirm his appointment. But that is subject to confirmation by this panel. Does that make sense? Have I answered your question there?
Could I just add to that, please? If I may, he makes no decisions of any kind. He is not a signatory to, for example, Section 22A agreements. His role is to learn the job in the hope and the expectation, we don't know yet, that the panel will approve him. That will be a matter for the panel alone to decide. But he is not someone who is signing off documents or advising me as to what I should do. And that's a really important point, I think, to just stress.
Thank you. Lauren, if I could ask you for your legal advice, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you've identified, the restrictions in relation to the appointment of senior officers relates to a position of employment, so a direct contractual relationship between the office of the PCC and that individual. The sort of arrangement that Mr Heinsohn has described is more like an agency type arrangement, so a local interim arrangement where someone, presumably that person is still self-employed and paid on a contractual hourly or daily rate rather than being an employee of the organisation, which I think is different and takes it outside of the scope of the requirements to have a confirmatory hearing.
So to put it in layman's terms, you're comfortable with the arrangement?
I'm comfortable with the arrangement if it's as I have described, that it's an agency, hourly, daily, weekly rate rather than an employee. If the person is an employee of the OPCC in the office of a Chief Finance Officer, then the regulations would apply to it.
Okay. Simon.
Yes, just 2 practical points, really, if I may, Chair. Firstly, Paul had fulfilled a similar role in Northamptonshire whilst they were looking for someone suitable to be an OPCC CFO, and then they happened to find the person who was in Leicestershire and took them. So Paul very generously agreed to cover across. So there's a sort of pragmatic bit of this. When OPCCs were established, it was not uncommon in some places for the role to be shared of finance officer to the chief constable and finance officer to the OPCC. It isn't something I would personally seek in the long run for all the reasons I think that the panel are kind of rehearsing here. But it has been shared in some places on a full-time basis, and this is an interim arrangement.
Durham it is now.
Yeah, and as the PCC is saying, so forces like Durham, we believe it is now. So the constitutional point is well made. Obviously, it's ultimately for the panel, but it isn't uncommon, would be my point.
John, do you have anything else to say, or are you comfortable with what you've
I
heard?
merely thought that this needed to be on the record before we actually spoke about the report. That's fine, I'm comfortable.
Members, anything else on this one?
There you are. You're back on again.
I'm back on that one now. Okay, Lord Bark, I'm sure you want to introduce the item 7, proposed preset 1819 and medium-term financial plan. So over to yourself, and I suspect you'll be handing over to Mr Dawkins as well.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Chairman. As you can see, obviously, I'm surrounded on this table by the Chief Constable. I'm very grateful for him coming along. Mr Dawkins, my deputy, Mr Master, and of course now the Chief Executive Chief Executive as well. My intention is to open this report quite shortly, and then really to ask you and the committee whether there are questions and comments you want to make, which will be responded to, Mr Dawkins, Chief Constable, myself, and others if need be. But I will try and be as short as I can. But I want to start by saying, of course, this is a pleasure for me to present my budget for the year 2018-19 to the panel. You know who I have with me on this table. Can I welcome all members of the panel who have joined it since the last budget, but in particular the 2 new independent members who have gone through the process of competition and are with us today. The budget is complex, but I believe that the comprehensive report explains the rationale for it and my recommendations regarding the precept. Of course, we work on the budget throughout the year, but the police funding settlement made by the government and revealed by the policing officer 6 days before Christmas did necessitate some considerable reworking of our original figures and assumptions in a pretty short space of time. Important though that work was, it has enabled me to present you with a budget that takes into account public opinion. As soon as the Minister explained that the government's proposals for an increase in police funding were founded on local residents paying more, I launched a public consultation on the level of council tax local people are prepared to pay towards policing. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. The budget sets out to address the key risks and threats to public safety and, of course, the Chief Constable's needs from an operational perspective. I'm mindful, too, and this has been an important consideration, that I've ensured that the budget meets the Minister's own proposals and priorities, too. Let me make a few broader observations. Austerity has seen £2.3 billion cut from the National Police budget since 2010, a figure around 25%, which has led to the loss of 20,000 police officers nationally, taking us to the lowest level for 30 years. Closer to home, In Leicestershire, we've lost around a quarter of our officers, 547 over that period. As all members of the panel know, we have one of the fastest growing populations in England and Wales. That's all three elements that make up this police force: the city, the county and Rutland. And this, alongside the reductions, means that the ratio of police officers has reduced from one officer for every 430 citizens in 2006 to one officer for every 601 citizens today. And it's a matter of fact that the Chief Constable and I have both lobbied strongly for more appropriate funding for policing across LLR. Among other things, we've cited the prevalence of new and emerging crimes and the reduction in neighbourhood policing. And I should also emphasise that crime itself is a comparatively small part of the demand and expectations placed upon modern policing. The Chief Constable will comment on this if he wants to, but approximately 75% of the demand is not crime related. So the government's permission to raise our funds, to raise our funding, was not unwelcome in itself. I have to say I was disappointed that the whole burden, not just part of it, but the whole burden, is to be placed on local residents without a greater contribution from the central funding pot. Because as members will know, the government's grant from the Home Office stayed precisely the same, and thus, of course, in the real world loses value because of increased prices, i.e. inflation. The government's own financial calculations are based on the assumption that every police and crime commissioner, all 43 of us, will increase the precept by £12 for a Band D household. Only by them doing that can the government bring £450 million in all into national policing. I am grateful to the support from local taxpayers for this. We received, in a fairly short period of time, over 1,700 responses, and over 71% said they were prepared to pay the additional amount. The additional amount will raise £2.6 million over and above the 1.99% rise that I was previously allowed to make. But this isn't the end of the problem, and it's important the panel understands that it doesn't make up for the £38 million already taken out of our budget. We still need to and will focus on efficiency. We need to find further savings to ensure there's no cliff edge in a couple of years' time. I hope you'll agree that in Leicestershire we have a record of being financially responsible and that our finances are generally in good order. We have done what we said we were going to do with last year's budget, a number of things, but particularly increasing the number of officers by 8, one for each police area. And of course the introduction of Darwin is delivering a real transformational change as well. This budget seeks to build on that progress. Without the precept increase and without using reserves, I'd be sitting here explaining the loss of 52 more officer posts. Instead, the budget seeks to recruit an additional 24 police officers, 3 for each of the 8 police force areas. In reality, that increase, I argue, equates to 76 officers. We'll be putting also, in addition, more resources for dedicated investigators staff into cases of sexual assault. And as part of our ongoing drive to ensure a truly representative workforce, we will boost our positive action team with another post. In addition, investment in technology is one of the greatest efficiencies we can make, and it's what the government looks to us to do. And that's why I'm supporting the investment in middleware technology, and in the mobile fingerprint software. Both those will save valuable time and improve operational procedures, enabling more time to be spent on the front line, visible and accessible policing. On election, I pledged to increase police officer visibility, and every measure we're taking in this year's budget is designed to increase the time spent on frontline policing, making officers more accessible to the public. In considering the options, I was determined to lay safe foundations for future years. It would be tempting to go for broke, but that would be a grave mistake and irresponsible. In order to protect policing and the communities of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, I don't believe I really have much other choice but to opt for the £12 precept increase. This is the rate for a Band D average property, and the majority of people will thankfully pay a little less than that. It gives me no pleasure at all to put up or seek to put up the precept, particularly at a time of austerity. But I don't feel I have any choice but to propose that to the panel this afternoon. You will see too from the report that we have used our reserves wisely to provide increased operational resilience while not leaving ourselves vulnerable in future years. We cannot simply empty that pot or take it to dangerously low levels. There's no magic top-up formula. I'm satisfied that this budget meets the Minister's demand for greater transparency, and I hope that's evidenced in the papers in front of you. I repeat, there's no easing up on the drive for further cost efficiencies. The investment in technology and ongoing focus on threat, risk and harm confirms the transformational approach that's been adopted. However, I can confirm that the amount of the budget that goes towards policing has gone up by 2.2% since I came into office. Today, 97.8% of the budget, if this budget is approved, is allocated to the Chief Constable for operational policing. In 17-18, this figure was 96%, and in the previous year, 95.6%. It's my belief and my hope that you will agree that this budget will enhance the delivery of the Police and Crime Plan that we published in March last year, and in doing so meet public needs and expectations. Above all, I believe this is a responsible budget that looks, of course, to the present needs, but also looks to future years when we can't be sure that we will be allowed to precept to this amount or that the grant itself won't go down. So we have to look to future years, and there still does remain, as there's bound to, some uncertainty regarding funding. So with that introduction, Chairman, and I'm sorry if it's gone on a bit long, that's how I like to introduce the paper, which of course Sir Dawkins is very well suited to answer questions or make comments on, but that's how I'd like to open my proposition that this budget is accepted.
Thank you, Lord Bark. Mr Dawkins, do you have anything to say before we start the question?
Thank you, Chair. Just really in support of what Lord Bark said there, inviting members to turn to page 33, beginning at paragraph 83, which is my statement as the Temporary Chief Finance Officer of the robustness of the budget for 2018-19. Briefly, over on page 34, I can conclude that the budget has been prepared on a robust basis. It does include investment into visible policing in line with the Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan. It does, in the short term, use reserves to support the budget requirement, but the budget is stable nonetheless. And finally, on page 35, to draw your attention to the fact that after 2019-20, the challenge remains in relation to medium-term financial planning. further savings will need to be found, and there is uncertainty ahead in terms of what government funding might look like, and therefore what the overall medium-term financial position of the OPCC and Force might be at that point in time. But overall, in terms of my statement there, I do support the budget that's before the panel and members today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lord Barker and Mr Dawkins. Members, we come to the questioning now, and just to remind you, we will take each section as it comes, so if you can please stay alert. So effectively we bypass the recommendations at this early stage and move to page 18, and we have the executive summary, which takes us from paragraph 4 all the way through to page 16. So questions, members. Abdul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know whether it's just in relation to page 18, but the overall response in terms of what Lord Back has presented in relation to the budget, if I may comment on that, Mr. Chairman. I guess it's one that needs to be said that we're in a position now this year, and I guess every other year and years to come, that somebody would have to pay for policing crime and disorder, and especially the budgets. I guess it's a sad fact that we're in a position where we have to, fork out £12 per household of bandy council tax, and we wouldn't have been in this position if the government would have forked out some of the grants that it's expecting, and rather than asking police crime commissioners to put a budget forward to fill the gaps. But I guess we welcome the budget in relation to what's been presented, and overall it would benefit not only policing but also aspects of policing, and especially in the city where we would have an increase, I understand, of 12 extra police officers in the city alone, and that's something that is highlighted within the report, with not only currently the commitment of current officers but additional officers as well. And overall, in other factors within the budget, there are some questions, needed to ask whether we're going to go into the budget pages later on, or whether I can pick those up now, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, if we can pick them up in the appropriate sections when they come along, because you say your questions relate to all through the report, do they?
Yeah, I guess it's about the reserves, and it's also about underspends.
What section? Can you wait until those sections arrive?
Sure.
Then?
Okay.
Can I ask you a question, Councillor Osborne? When you said we support, what do you mean by we?
Well, I guess I speak for the City of Leicester in relation to the budget that's been put forward. I speak for my colleagues here, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions? I have one, Mr Dawkins, on paragraph 14, savings plans. Paragraph 14 explains the funding of a change programme, but no information on savings proposals are included in the MTFP. Can you please outline the areas that you expect to investigate for savings and when they are likely to be implemented from? Not unreasonable to expect plans for consideration in the next few months, as only you have 2 years to generate proposals and gain approval and implements. Not a long time, as we all know, sadly. As the funding for the change team is from reserves, how do you expect to fund the implementation?
Thank you, Chair. I can advise the panel that the funding for the change team is now being mainstreamed into the budget before you today, so the change team is no longer being funded from reserves. The costs of that team are built into the base, which is around about £250,000. In terms of the question around the plan in relation to savings, as Lord Bark said in his opening introduction, we've introduced a new target operating model for the force under the title of Project Darwin. That is now being implemented. It's being embedded across the force area, and certainly through investment proposed within the budget before you today, and through other initiatives that are being worked through at this current point in time, over the next 6 to 9 months, we intend to develop a further savings plan to effectively seek to balance the budget over the medium term. That work is ongoing. I can't share any firm plans with members today in relation to that, but in due course we will be bringing, I'm sure, some proposals back to you by means of a paper to explain what that looks like, what the implications are, and what the impact is in financial terms on the medium-term financial plan.
Members, anything else on this section? If not, we go from bottom of page 19, precept proposals, paragraph 17 through to 22. Questions on these? Nope. Thank you, members. The provisional grant settlement, page 20, paragraph 23, right through to 35, isn't it? Yep, 35. Questions? Malise.
Thank you. Lord Bark, I think I have given you an answer to the question. I hope you had notice of this question. I raised it on number 26, the Police and Crime Commissioners Treasurers Society. Could you just let me know how much it costs to be a member of that, but more so how much it costs to be a member of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners?
I think Mr. Dawkins and I, between us, can answer that. As far as the APCC is concerned, that's a figure of £19,750 per year is our membership subscription. Every other police OPCC is a member of it. Not one has opted out. So that's the figure for that. The Pact, which is the Treasure Society, costs £2,622 to join each year. APACE, which is to do with the chief execs, is £900 a year. And ICVA, which is the Independent Custody Visitors, which I'm pleased to say I'm now on the national board of since a couple of weeks ago, is £700 a year. So those figures add up to £23,972, £24,000 a year. As to the one question was, around the APCC membership, and the other one was
I raised it under the Police and Crime Commissioners Treasurer Society.
the Treasurer Society. So I hope those answers are satisfactory to you.
Could you just explain, for my benefit, you're all members at 90. That's basically 100 Band D ratepayers paying a subscription for the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. What do you actually get out of it? You've appointed a new chief executive. I see it probably quite a high rate, but what else are the benefits of it?
Well, it is a collective body for police and crime commissioners. I think if you didn't have it, you'd have to invent it. It's important that there is a body which brings us together in order to discuss, debate, as a counter in a way, in the best possible way, to the National Police NPCC, and we meet with them, of course, on a two-day conference or meeting sometime during the year. They have people at the APCC who give advice and do work in order to advise us as to the best practice for OPCCs. I'm not without criticism of it, actually, as a body, if you press me, Malise, but actually I think it serves its purpose, and I think for £19,000 a year, it's actually not bad value, and we would be a very strange OPCC if we were to just unilaterally withdraw from it, and I think we'd feel the loss of it quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, for what it's worth, there was an equivalent for police authorities, the APA, an exemplar of something that you could argue that the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners bring. There was a thing called the Police Reform and Transformation Board. That is the body assigned with allocating the £175 million that actually has been top-sliced from us all, but to give us the ability to transform. that body has 3 PCCs on it, chosen by the APCC to represent the PCCs, so that there can be a national decision-making body. And I happen to be one of the chiefs who sort of marks them in terms of I sit on it for chiefs. So, I mean, I do agree with the PCC. You have to. There's got to be a point of aggregation here, and there's also some efficiencies in it, because if you're going to look at issues like diversity and cross-cutting issues, it makes sense to do it once and have a national view of things that have got to be done, accepting within all of that there's different then political views about some of those things. But so I kind of agree. If it wasn't there, you'd have to invent it, because otherwise you've got 42 plus MOPAC separate bodies, and how do they coordinate? And when you look at some of the threats we face, things like counter-terrorism, serious and organised crime, which the Home Secretary puts in the strategic policing requirement, those need delivering across all of us. So it makes sense. So, for instance, on the National Counter-Terrorism Board, the Association of PCCs is represented as the sort of democratically accountable part of something that we've just got to all be doing, because the threat's everywhere. So I can't believe I'm advocating more governance, but it goes against the grain a bit. But actually, I would support it.
Could I just add to that? Thank you, Simon. But the National Criminal Justice Board, for example, which is a major board that the Home Secretary and the Lord Chancellor sit on, chair, I think, the PCCs are represented by a police and crime commissioner, and you can't see that happening if there wasn't a board.
Thank you. Maronisa, it'll be your first question, and we do operate by House of Commons rules, so I promise you there'll be no heckling on your first question.
Thank you.
Over to you, Maronisa.
Okay, thank you. Lord Park, you've presented, I suppose, the rationale for the precept increase, and the points that you made are really well made to a certain extent. And I'm also pleased that you actually decided to go out and consult both on kind of priorities and the precept increase. I don't know what the response rates were, but obviously you, in a sense, 71% supported it, so you do have a mandate, in a sense, for the increase. That said, it's actually quite concerning in terms of the grant allocation centrally from government, and I just wanted to kind of ask a couple of questions around this. And if you look at the provisional grant settlement for 2018-2019, obviously you yourself have said that the grant from the centre has remained the same, has not taken account of any sort of demands on policing or any kind of expectations from the public as well in terms of effective policing and neighbourhood policing as well. But you went further and said, actually, year on year, which includes 2019, 2020, 21, we're going to be in a similar position. And I suppose for me, there are two questions. One is around this whole public perception and public response. So currently there is support for effective policing and people are prepared to pay. Given that, year on year you still have the same grant or you have reductions in those grants centrally, that may not be the case in Leicestershire, Leicester or Rutland. And I'm just wondering, how would you respond to that as an office, and how would the police respond in relation to that? And secondly, in terms of the grant allocation, there is a lot here about the formula not being implemented and gross underfunding for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And having served on the CCG in Leicester, it's the city, we had the same issue around, effective and fair funding. And I suppose my question here is, what is it that you are doing or your office is doing in relation to influence and to try and get the centre to listen? And how confident you are that we're actually going to get a fair deal, in the following years?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Let's see where to begin. As far as the government grants concerned, let me be absolutely upfront about it. It stayed exactly the same this year. It was thought that it might reduce by 1.4%. That was in national forecasts among treasurers. It stayed the same, but by staying the same, as we've already said, it loses its value. The government has said that it will stay the same next year, but said nothing about the years after, when the medium-term forecast is going to again put in the possibility of a 1.4 reduction. As I've already expressed, I think it's unfortunate. As far as the asking central government to think about this, I must say both the Chief Constable and I have been rather loud about this over the course of the last year, but I also want to say that the panel itself has also made its representations to government, having discussed this matter over a number of meetings, and we've had some excellent support from members of Parliament from all sides. So it's a bit of a disappointment that the grant wasn't put up. Now, as far as the budget consultation was concerned, I don't want to pretend for a moment that it was the most sophisticated thing that's ever been done in the form of consultation. 6 weeks before Christmas, we had the announcement. We have to, the 31st of January is an important day for our meeting with the Police and Crime Panel, with a budget that we have to put before them. So what could we do in that period, holiday period as well? So we use websites in order to do a consultation. And we got, as I think I hinted at, over 1,743 responses. And I have here actually details, which are very welcome for the members of the panel to see. The 71% in favour, just short of 25% against, with the balance and don't knows. We have them split between various faiths, between various ethnic minorities. We also have split between gender as well. I'm not a statistician. I myself have to say, I'm absolutely blunt about it, 1,743, brilliant that we've got that many, but for me, that doesn't mean that the people of Leicester are overwhelmingly in favour of something or overwhelmingly against something. It's the best we can do in the circumstances. But I'm told that this is a trend, and that's something we can rely on to a certain extent in arguing our case. A politician's answer to your question about what I'd do if these figures were different is first of all say it's a hypothetical question. But then having got over that point, I think I would probably have had to bite the bullet in any event. I want to be absolutely upfront with you, bite the bullet and propose to you that we did it anyway. I have to say that, because the government are assuming that we're doing this. They say £450 million extra for policing in the year 1819, of which they calculate 270 million comes from each police and crime commissioner putting up their precept by £12 a year. And so if we weren't to do that, then we wouldn't be doing what the government is presuming that we will do. I hope that answers your question to some extent. If I've left bits out, please, with the Chairman's permission, come back to me.
I think the final question was, how confident are you that, I know centrally you said there are a lot of representations that have been made, that actually we are going to get a fair kind of funding going forward?
If you press me, not very confident. That's why we have to be so cautious and careful in this budget, because we have to think of the long-term, medium-term and long-term for the Leicestershire force, working in a community that's growing all the time in population and getting younger too, year by year. So I'm not confident, and that's why we have to be cautious in the forecasts that we make and in the decisions that we've taken.
Thank you. Just before I hand over to John, it is to do, obviously, following on from this, paragraph 70. I've noticed that there's you're assuming that the 1.7 reduction, 1.4% reduction is factored into the estimates. Are you? What happens if it's worse than that?
Page 17, side chair. Chairman, you've lost me completely. Sorry. What?
Paragraph 7, page 29. Page
Yeah.
17,
Yeah.
76.
Yes, there we are. Yeah. What if that's wrong? What if that's too low? And then it's more than 1.4%. Well, my experience is that forecasters from OPCC treasurers and force treasurers too are usually pretty cautious, pretty careful, and I have to say I have faith in their judgment, but it could be less, and that would cause us more trouble. If that was the position, then we would be in a more difficult position than we would be otherwise, and that's all I can say. Perhaps, Chairman, you know more than I do, but this, if anything, is a hypothetical question because we have to wait 2 years to see what the government decides to do.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points, if I may, Chair. I mean, the thing to remember in all of this paper is we spend about 83% of our budget on people. So the answer to all of your questions, what if we'd have fewer people? Because our back office, isn't, well, it's pretty close to the leanest in British policing. And I don't like the phrase back office, but I think at least we'll all vaguely have an idea what I'm talking about. And then if you turn over the page, you've drawn our attention to page 29, page 30. There isn't much keeps me awake at night, but the jaws of doom in the middle of paragraph 71, that is the gap going forward. So for this year, the last time that I joined you at this panel, we were thinking we would have a £5 million gap. If this budget goes through, it's only £500,000. Great news. But it's still £500,000. And Lord Backer's explained some of the plans around reserves, but the paragraph 71 across the top there, and I know I'm now breaking... You said you didn't like going backwards, Chairman, but you didn't say you didn't like going forwards. And you've taken us forwards with the greatest of respect. So that first box on 71, that is the potential gap. And the simple answer is, and your question earlier about the change team, what is the change team doing? It is coming up with ways that we could reconfigure to different level of resources. This year, a bit out of the blue, it may be, subject to your decision, we can actually grow a little bit more than we thought we were going to reduce. And overall, as Lord Backer said, that's 76 people. But it just means there'll be less people. That is how we will flex, and that is what the change team are doing. That's why we're looking at agile working. That's why we're looking at our business processes. That's why we're trying to look how we can work in partnership and get upstream of things. But brutal, we spend most of our money on people, and that is where the flex would be.
We'll return to crocodile jaws in the description, but we're not going to mention that. But John.
Oh, sorry, thank you. On page 23 on the chart, Council Tax Collection Fund surplus, I was actually thinking of risk. Have you taken into account what we believe will be a lower council tax collection rate once universal credit comes in?
Would you like me to answer that, Chair? What we've done in terms of the budget for 18-19 and the figures included therein is to take the information that's been provided to us by the borough and district councils and the unitaries in the form of the city and Rutland. So the detail behind that in terms of what's at the heart of your question there, we haven't seen that data. We've just purely applied within the report the figures that have been sent through to us. But I'm aware of those conversations taking place. I think there is a risk, a longer-term risk in relation to that. And we wait to see what the outcome of those conversations will be and what that will mean for us in terms of tax base and collection fund moving forward. But yes, it is another potential risk area. I would agree.
Members, anything else on this section?
Sorry, just one final question. This is in relation to the grant settlement, but I'm looking at section 27 around the key features of the settlement and what that includes. There is a lot here around savings. So basically, there is an expectation that you make certain efficiency savings, and part of that is around looking at national procurement. I suppose my question here is, given what's happened with Carillion nationally, which was a preferred provider, how does that kind of match with what you're trying to do in terms of procurement? I suppose, what are the risks? Do you know what the risks are?
Chairman, if I may, I mean, the national procurement piece is based on a piece of work, the CLEP programme, the Collaborative Law Enforcement Procurement Programme, which is looking at what are things that police forces buy, standardise what you buy, aggregate the buying, and then see what the best route to market is. That manifests itself in lots of different ways, lots of different things. So, for instance, vehicles is kind of the thing that we always get to. So we certainly buy all our vehicles in a shared procurement. There are other things that are a bit totemic. Uniform is one of them, and I won leading that piece of work nationally, which is probably the hardest thing that I have to do on a regular basis. So there is a national programme. It's overseen by what's known as the National Commercial Board, and it is seeking to confirm and identify those savings. But in all of that, there is a thing, which is if you put your eggs into one basket, then you have a risk. And so those involved in this, I should stress, are mostly procurement professionals, and we do understand that. And you might see that play out. So, for instance, about half the forces in the country use a crime and intelligence system called Niche. We use Niche. The other half don't, because that does create a market. But, you know, you're right to identify the risk. If you go to a sole supplier of anything, then you may have an issue. So it is there as part of the risk assessment. And policing is, for some things, we're quite a big market, and for some things, we're not. And depending on the scale of our, you know, we do buy a lot of vehicles and we do a lot of miles. Some of the other stuff, we're quite small beer, really. So there's different ways of aggregating it. There's some national contracts, there's some regional contracts, things like interpreter services, but ultimately it's a local decision and in law for the chief and the PCC, actually, for most things. So we are seized of it, yeah, and we didn't have anything with the company you mentioned.
Manjula.
So, thank you, Chair. Following, and I was going to ask that question, which has been answered. But, Chair, on one hand, we are going to the householders saying that if we agree the precept, £12 increase in their rent, which is they might not mind because they want to have a police service provided. And further to that, the statement says that on top of the 100 million of potential savings in areas such as fleet and professional services. One hand, they have to pay extra money, householders, to provide service. This is the suggestion, not by you, by the Minister. So this is not going to be accepted by the communities or the people who are going to pay the money. And the national procurement, again, how competitive they are, how cost-effective they are. Are you binding to use them, or you just can have your own procurement? And last one is the Police Transformation Fund. So I just want a bit of clarification that how that fund will be used. There are more.
I feel like I'm sitting in exam, Chairman. It's a very good question. Should we do the second one first? So the Police Transformation Fund. The idea of the Police Transformation Fund was to liberate some money to enable there to be innovation and transformation of service delivery. In effect, that has, in its first instance, been a set of bidding rounds where people have bid with ideas that are scalable, and they vary. And the one that we were successful with our colleagues from the East Midlands was around using the crime and intelligence system between us and bringing that in and having a shared system and some of the business benefits that freed up. Going ahead, I think it will be more of a commissioning body. And one of the things, and I've already said I sit on it on behalf of chiefs, so one of the things that we're trying to make sure we do is those who have had money do have to be held account, and that's done through PCCs who are holding the funds in different places. But has what you've proposed worked, and is it scalable and roll-outable? And that's the thing. And there's a bit of me, it's all great, but this was money that was ours and was top-sliced from our budget. So that's where that 175 million quid has come from across all the forces. So there's no new money. You have to remind, the first bit was about procurement. We have our own procurement team. I would say they're one of the better performing procurement teams. The thing at paragraph 27, so C, A, B and C, are all quotes from the Minister's letter. So what the Minister has said nationally to policing is you will save £100 million within the procurement bit, and we think we can do it this way. That lands really differently with different forces, and typically for us, being selfish, we are right at the bottom end, which is the top end of spend. So our estates are the most efficient in the country. Our use of vehicle fleet is pretty close to it. So for some forces, and in all of this, the Met are in. And the Met just have a scale. Ballpark, the Met are a quarter of British policing. So if the Met can save 3% of something, it's a massive amount of money. And for us, when it cascades down, it often isn't a massive amount of money. So if I was a local taxpayer, which of course I am, this is good news. This is making sure that we procure things for good value and that that are a good price for the taxpayer. So I think it's a good thing, but there are risks in it. And bluntly, we don't just go into every national procurement if we have got a better value. But by procuring with others or on behalf of others, we often get a better value. So it's an area that we're focused on, but I'd be sort of reassured by that. It makes sense for the taxpayer.
Any organisation to function, which I respect, leadership and sustainability, these are the two factors which public want to see. What you have explained, the operation side. Procurement, as I said, I don't believe that national procurement will be better. Look, sometimes you go through ESPO, which pen cost a pound, and you ended up paying up £5-10 because it goes through the whole process. So we can't say that national procurement will be sustainable.
No, I agree with you. We procure some stuff locally, we procure some stuff regionally, and we procure some stuff nationally. So, for instance, the radio system that we all use, which needs to be interoperable everywhere, will be a national thing. We actually buy our vehicles in a sort of regional cabal, which has got 9 or 10 forces in it, because that's the way we found we get the best price. So we don't just go in every time nationally, we do look at it. He's very tight with money. He's the man that advises me on this. You have to watch him.
Abdul.
Yeah, Chair, page 21, in relation to the budget C, the question really was, is there a national or is there a guideline in relation to a threshold which there is a minimum and a maximum of reserves that we have? And I'd come back on the answer.
Well, I'll pass on to Paul on that. There is certainly for the general reserve, and Paul can tell you what the advice is as far as that's concerned, and we fit right into the middle of that. As far as other parts of the reserves are concerned, it sometimes seems a bit as though the government have chosen reserves as being what they think is the weaknesses of police, of OPCCs, in that the reserves are too high. But to be fair, as the quote from the policing minister, which is what A, B and C are, suggests that some reserves are much, much higher than other reserves. And of course, there may well be an argument that some reserves are too high and should be cut back. But for other forces, they've got hardly any reserves at all. And the necessity is to have one for a rainy day, of course. I think we're quite well placed. But I have taken the decision this year, after advice, that this is the time when we should cut back on our reserves. Not our general reserve, which is, as I say, for a kind of disaster scenario, we just need the money, but on our other reserves, in order to spend them on police officers at this time, while keeping enough in the bank, as it were, for other things that may come up in the course of the next year or so. But Paul, where do we stand in terms of reserves?
Okay, well, I don't want to jump ahead, Chair, to page 31 unless you want me to, but we do talk about reserves in more detail on page 31. But if members wish to turn to that, paragraph 76A, and specifically the question around the general reserve, SIPFA, or the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy do provide guidance around this, and their recommendation is that we hold reserves, the general reserve, the uncommitted reserve, in other words, at between 3 and 5% of our annual net revenue spend. So as the net revenue spend moves, then ideally the reserve should move alongside it. No plans this year to alter the level of the reserve, which currently stands at £6 million, as quoted in the paper, which represents for Leicestershire Police 3.5% of the net budget revenue requirement. All the reserves are held by Lord Bark as Police and Crime Commissioner, and we can only draw down on those reserves with Lord Bark's approval. So hopefully that answers the question in terms of that particular reserve at least.
Yeah, one of the reasons for asking that is I think I've been around too long when we've seen reserves in local government, and when you see reserves in schools, for example, local government wants to say, all these schools have got all these reserves that they're sitting on. That might be a bad example, but the good one is central government could see local government sitting on all these reserves, and in the future we'll be sitting on massive reserves in police authorities up and down the country, and all of a sudden, if there isn't any guideline, they'll say, well, why are they sitting on all those reserves? In hindsight, that's happened in the past, and it will happen in the future. And I'm just envisaging, why can't we dip into the most minimum threshold of our reserves and use it to our best efficiency as we can today?
And that's exactly what we've done in this budget, of course. We've used £5 million worth of reserves because we think this is the right moment to use them. And I hope the panel will approve of that and use them for sensible reasons. And we're also, so we've done that on the basis that they were riding as high as they should be. We can lower them. The great danger is that you lower them too low and then find yourself in a really difficult position.
Okay, thank you. Still on page 21, I just want to, paragraph B. The digital workforce. Fully enthusiastic about this, but tell me if I'm wrong on this. Does it rely on connectivity? And if it does, when it comes to Harborough, when it comes to Rutland, when it comes to Melton Mowbray, when it comes to parts of Charnwood and all around the area, are you satisfied as PCC, it's all there, satisfied that connectivity is up to speed?
Yes, I am, but I have my strengths and weaknesses, and this is one of my weaknesses, to be honest, the answer to this question. So I am going to pass on this particular question, but I mean, and perhaps it can be explained to the panel what it is we are going to be putting some money into in order to make sure that we have a better digitally enabled workforce. These are an important part of the budget. This middleware, as it's called, that will, I think, be a more satisfactory answer that I can give. But of course, we're connected up. Yep.
I mean, Chair, just dead quickly. I mean, in general terms, in terms of policing, we're towards the upper end of what we've got. Body-worn video, standard issue for everybody, really important piece of kit. Laptop computers, we're all sat here surrounded by paper just to prove that, but we have got laptop computers which are a personal issue to people, the idea being that they can be out and about and doing their work without having to return to the mothership of a police station. The specific bit of technology within the budget is a piece of middleware that will help the use of that. One of our neighbouring forces claims it saves them an hour and a half every time they have to put together a court file. I couldn't stand over that completely for us yet because we're looking at what they were doing before and what we're doing. So we're doing lots of that work. The answer to your question is the connectivity has been an issue. Some very clever people have done some very clever things about using these kind of things as relay points to create Wi-Fi bubbles. That seems to work pretty well. Even the Chief Constable has managed to make it work in the Harborough district on occasion. There are some places where it's still a little bit of an issue, but basically, by using these as hotspot creators, we seem to have largely overcome that problem. And it's available at a reasonable price to local councils.
Alan has the same concerns as myself, that's obvious.
Yes, Chairman. I think you may be struggling using that as a hot point in parts of Rutland. There will be, if you're lucky, you might almost get 2.5 G.
Yeah, we've got many hot spots in the Vale, so you'll find them down there. Members, moving on. Any other questions on this section? You're quite hands are down at this moment in time. If not, we move on, and we move to 28, 23, page 23, Council Tax Referendum, which takes us from para 36 and 37. That's all. Members? Thank you very much. Page 24, risks, paras 38. Nope. Still on page 24, base budget preparation, approach and scrutiny, 39 to 49. Page 25, revenue budget, 50 through to 53, effectively, just 50 really. Malaise.
Thank you, Lord Barker. I see it's an operational matter, so I will ask the question really. Police and community support officers, the PCC has supported the Chief Constable. Can you explain to me why you've supported the Chief Constable? And are we going to see the end of police and PCSOs when the reserves are used up by the end of 2021?
No, we're not going to see the end of PCSOs. They have a valuable, continue to have a valuable part to play. The policy that's set out here was discussed at length during the course of the last year. It did look as though we had to make a choice, or the police had to make a choice, it is operational as you say, between police officers and PCSOs. Of course there's room for both, and there should be both, but when you get the balance between the two, it's really very much a matter for police, for the police to have a view, and I would have to be very sure of my ground before saying no to that. I would have objected, I have to say, fundamentally, if the Chief Constable had suddenly said, well, we're going to do a Norfolk here and get rid of all PCSOs, as it were, by tomorrow. I think that would be absolutely wrong, knowing what good work PCSOs do in Melton as elsewhere. But when you come to the real point as to which, at this particular stage in Leicestershire Police Force's development, are necessary in order to make sure that Leicestershire Police can protect and secure the public, the balance seems to the police, and Simon can talk for himself here, to be slightly out of kilter, and that if we have the choice, and it did look as though we did, it would have to be to have police officer numbers rather than extra PCSO numbers. So a difficult decision was taken. I agreed with that decision, and that's why it's openly set out here. But Simon may want to add to that.
I don't know that I do want to add much, Chair. You'll be relieved. It was very eloquently done, if I may say, by the PCC. This is an affordability issue. What can we afford? And we need to make sure that our balance, our blend, is as best as it can be to deal with the threats that we have. So, but absolutely, I personally don't agree with Norfolk's position of getting rid of. This isn't a move towards that, or even we didn't even think of it, to be honest. But it's about what we can afford in a blend of a team. And there's a balance around relative cost. Police officers are more flexible because, in effect, the Chief Constable can tell them what to do and can post them where to go and can make them work 24/7 and do all sorts of things within the restrictions of police regulations. And just looking at our blend and what we need and where, accepting PCSOs are really, really valued in local communities. In the context of the £38 million we've saved, in the context of a potential £9 million gap ahead, we can't afford to have 251 PCSOs. So the number needs to reduce as the number of officers has reduced over time. But it absolutely isn't an attempt to go where others, well, one force has decided to go. Absolutely not, no.
Just one. I see, jumping ahead to page 31, that the reserve will be fully exhausted by 2021. Page 31, C, earmarked reserves. If so, where would the money come from after that time?
Certainly, you're right, the reserve will be exhausted, the PCSO reserve at paragraph 76C by 2021. But the ongoing establishment for PCSOs and the funding in relation to that is built into the medium-term financial plan for the future years, which is partly responsible for creating the funding gap that you've seen in the paper.
Just for a point of clarification, Lord Barr, reduction down to 221, you're not going to get rid of PCSO, so are you going to go down to a certain level? Can I just clarify this?
Yes, we are. I think the police proposal is to go down to 180, minimum of 180 in, is it 2021? Sorry, in 2021, and that's done by natural wastage. I mean, it's well known. I think a lot of PCSOs, or a number of them, I'd say a lot, a number of them seek and are successful in becoming police officers themselves. Others, of course, in the normal course, retire and do other things with their lives. But no one is being forced to stop being a PCSO. 180, I think, is the present policy.
Members, anything else on that section? If not, we carry on page 26, paragraph 53, investment. Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, paragraph 54. Commissioning, paragraph 55. Over to page 28. Capital Programme 2017-18 to 2021, Treasury and Management Strategy, 60 to 65. Yes, of course.
And could I just refer you to 63, paragraph 63, which I consider to be quite an important part of the responsible nature of the budget. There's 2.1 million of capital spend, largely technology, some fairly not hugely expensive items, but making up 2.1 million that were in capital. We decided that we would spend that, we would pay for those from revenue in order that we wouldn't have to borrow the money and pay it back from revenue in years that might be more difficult than the current year. So I hope that's an example of kind of forward thinking, which isn't very exciting in itself, but as actually might make a difference when I or my successor have to deal with budget problems.
Members, any comments on Lord Bart's statement? No. Thank you very much, Lord Bart. Page 29, medium-term financial plan, 66 through to 74. Page 31, use of reserves and balances, paras 75 through to 78, and we have John.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make a comment that I've tried to add these figures up and they don't. Now, I just thought I'd make that point.
Paul's looking quizzingly at you, John.
You cannot actually add the reserves up and make sense of them. I'm not saying that they're wrong. They're almost 99% certainly to be correct. However, the way you've presented them, if you take a starting figure of 22 million, you then take the 8.4 million, the 3 million at the top. You simply can't make them add up.
I can answer that, Chair. None of the reserves are listed here in this paper, so there are. Okay. Principally, there's a carry-forward reserve that's not quoted in the paper. That is for goods and services ordered but not received by the 31st of March the previous financial year. Some of the money is set aside for the costs of those when they arrive into the current financial year. That reserve is not shown, that's 2.2 million. And there are some other examples of principally earmarked reserves not contained in the paper. But you're quite right. As a total, it doesn't come back. But that's the reason why.
I take it you accept that answer, John.
I didn't think there was anything wrong. I actually didn't ask for an answer.
Thank you very much. Page 32, preset proposals 79 to 81. I thought your finger was going up there, Abdul, for a moment. No. Moving on, still on page 32, statement of the Chief Constable 82. Page 33, robustness of the budget, statement of the PCC Chief Finance Officer 83. Stephen.
Just for completeness, Chair, shouldn't it say the temporary Chief Finance Officer?
Noted. Any other questions on that statement? Page 35, implications. Nope. Thank you. I'm well aware there are appendix at 1, 2 and 3. I think there's a 3 anyway. Is there any questions on the appendix anywhere? John?
No, this time hopefully it's a helpful point. On page 46, 47, the one thing that local government has done in the last few years is changed the way it looks at its treasury management and, truthfully, also its debt structuring. Can I ask that you look at that? I mean, certainly you've got something like 7 million on deposit at any one moment, according to the report. If you manage to get 5% off a capital fund, that's £350,000. That's an awful lot of money that you are not receiving because of a zero risk policy. Most local government authorities have moved away from that. I suspect the police should as well. And there are also some areas within borrowing. There is some argument about how you structure your debt payments, which also could bring in a significant amount of money.
Thank you for the notice for that question.
Yes, and certainly agree with the members' points there. We had agreed some weeks ago through Lord Bark and the Chief Constable that we will conduct a review, joint review of the OPCC and Force to look at those very issues, and we intend to do that over the next 6 months. But absolutely, points not lost on us, and we'll be taking it forward. Thank you.
John, anything? Come back? No. Happy. Members, that brings us to the end of paper. Are there any further questions? Abdul.
Chair, thank you very much. There is a question, and it's a pledge as much as a question as well in relation to underspends, where you might have had in the current year, and that's something that I wanted to pick up on. And if that was the case, are we carrying that forward in the next year? The other pledge I was going to make was, I know this is a budget round, in relation to whether a plea in relation to opening up the police stations within the communities for longer hours, because currently, we're finding, and I speak for Kim Lane, Spinney Hill, etc., where people are going, and there are certain times that the police stations are not open, and that's something I wanted to put a request in relation to the budget. Thanks, Chair.
I can answer as far as the OPCC budget's concerned. There will be an underspend this year. We've already calculated what it's likely to be because of not filled posts. And it runs to something like £84,000. And Chief Constable and I have agreed some smallish sums to go to assist various parts of policing that are in need of some urgent additions. There's 8,000 has gone to rural crime. I'm talking broad figures here. 10,000 towards violent crime strategy, 4,000 to warning zone, 8,000 around knife crime, and 500 as a charity donation. There's still a balance left, obviously, and some more will be allocated in that way. So I've agreed that the underspend, or the vast majority of the underspend that the OPCC office has in the year 17-18 will go to some pressure points for the police. I think as far as the police station is concerned, I know you've raised the issue with me, Abdul. I'm going to ask Simon to answer that.
I'm probably not going to win the popularity contest now. Extensive work we did to identify where we needed buildings open and the hours they should be open showed really low footfall at lots of our buildings. There are other routes to contact us, the phone being the predominant one. You can also now report stuff online. And if you get to a police station and it isn't open, there is a phone on the outside that you can pick up and speak to the control room. If you want us to open our police stations more, you will not have as many operational police officers out and about. And it's that kind of a starker choice. So if there is a real need for the public to go to, but I haven't got the data with me, but the footfall at lots of our police stations was really, really low, and we actually costed what it cost each transaction to maintain some of those police stations open. And I absolutely get the emotional buy-in with police buildings and some sort of feeling of safety that they seem to bring, but there is a balance to be struck between how long we can open them for and what that costs against what else we can do. So if there is, and some locations are open more than others, the city centre gets more business. The police station with a cell block in it needs access for members of the legal profession and the like, but footfall at police stations is really low. So if there's a pressing customer need, then we'll look at it. But all of these things cost money. And so we've had to make some tough choices. It's interesting, lots of other people's business, and I've used it here before, I have a bank that I've never been to because it doesn't actually exist. It's completely virtual. So I hear what's being said, but there isn't an easy answer to it.
Manjula, on this one.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon, for your response to Councillor Osman's question. Footfall for the councillors, it becomes higher. Okay, crime is not always the critical crime or the serious crime. Crime is crime, especially majority of the communities whose English is not their first language. These days there are these bizarre letters coming around. You own a Mercedes, you haven't given penalty fine. Why haven't you paid it? Fake number plates. So my constituent came to me. So I took him to Keyham police station. There was only one person on the reception. For her it wasn't a serious crime, but for him it was, because this was the second letter which arrived. That man, all his life, he never owned a Mercedes. And his wife said, we are having sleepless nights. And they were demanding pay the money there. And then she said, why don't you go on website? I said, if they can go on website, they won't be standing here. This is why I have brought them here to Keyham station to report it. So you look into it. Because this sort of response doesn't help the communities. Okay, it's not a high-level crime, but at the same time, it is somebody's losing sleep over it.
Chair, if I may, yesterday a local councillor had an issue which wasn't that issue, but was a very similar issue raised. They emailed my office and said, this is a problem, how should I deal with it? It was allocated to somebody within our organisation, and we reached out back to that person. Police station opening is something that costs money that we don't have unless we do it differently. So, but there is the empirical evidence, because we made a very evidence-based decision about the buildings that we have. It didn't justify keeping some of them open because the public weren't going to them. So I do think there's also a thing for all of us about there are different routes in to get some of this service, because I don't doubt that this person was lying awake at night, but actually the best way of that being dealt with isn't to turn up at Guilham Lane. There are other ways of dealing with it. So I'm really keen to explore that we give a good service. I'm not unsympathetic to it, but financially, there's a finite resource that we've got to make choices about. So I hear everything that's being said, but I think there are other ways of dealing with those kind of issues. If somebody turns up in a police station at a point of dire need, there is a phone on the outside and they can talk straight to our control room. And that does happen. It may not be the ideal solution, but it's a really pragmatic solution.
Thanks for that, Simon. I suppose what you're trying to say really is that if you open police stations far more often, maybe 4 or 5 less police officers on the street. Simple as that. John.
Thank you, Chairman. Without wanting to open a debate and going through you, Chairman, but I agree with what Simon's saying. It is a difficult thing, and I've had this debate many times with the police as regards to the cost of this. However, a suggestion maybe coming forward from using my district hat on and planning terms is there's a lot of talk about developments. I understand the city, but we're out in the rural areas as well. And there's an opportunity when it comes to a lot of developments that we've got now to look at satellites. Now, maybe not a satellite office, but the satellite almost turning the clock back to the years gone by with the phones for the police. There is great opportunity at this present time to place these phones and use it through 106 agreements to actually raise these funds to actually put this on larger developments that will make the public feel a lot more comfortable and feel that they are being listened to. We all know about mobile phones and we all know about the internet. However, there is that opportunity, and I do sympathise with Lord Back and also Simon as regards the cost of this. I understand that. But that's more of a statement, Chairman, not looking for an answer.
Well, Chair, if I could just quickly, firstly, that's really useful, and members may remember we were exploring what could happen with some of the larger developments around Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland in the past. We've currently got 58 neighbourhood offices in a variety of places, in businesses, in parish council offices, on the Belgrave. We've also got the shared front offices with a number of council colleagues, so Rutland and Charnwood perhaps most notably. We've got one other, I'm now offending whoever's slipped my mind. Thank you, Northwest. And then also what we're trying to do is be out and about in communities. And if you look on new media, you'll see lots of our neighbourhood teams saying, I'm currently in insert name of well-known local cafe. I'm there for the next 2 hours. Come and see me. So we're trying to be out there. We get the accessibility point. But the point that's just been made is worthy of exploring. But we currently have 58 similar things all across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, which is in effect an office a neighbourhood team can use, sometimes exclusive to them, sometimes shared with others, as a start point and as a point where they can have meetings and see people. So we are trying to do that, and it's a really good way for us of being out there.
Right, thank you, members. I believe the questions have finally exhausted. Yep. We have a recommendation which I'm going to move. The recommendation at 3A, B, C, D and E. I'm not going to read all through them. We can all read English fairly easily. I'd like to think we can. Anyway, it's all there. I move that recommendation. I look for a seconder. Have Michael on my left.
I'm happy to second, Chair.
And also John as well. That's great. It's such an important vote. This is one of the rare occasions I do ask members to actually raise their hands to this vote. So, members, you have the recommendation. It's been moved, it's been seconded, it's been third. All in favour, raise their hands, please. Thank you, members. That's quite clear. That's unanimous. Moving on to item 8 on the agenda, the OPCC office structure, page 1 to 56. Get there myself. It says the author is Paul Heinsohn. Does that mean you're going to present this, Paul?
It does. But I'm a bit worried you said 1 to 56, because I only count 1 to 14.
Page numbers.
Page numbers. Okay, right. Okay. Well, I won't run through in detail, but you've got the information there. I think the key factors here in influencing the shape of the office were there's been a period of instability, probably right through all last year. So a lot of posts have been put out in a structure. Presented there as proposed posts, but never been filled. We've had quite a lot of difficulty in filling posts, not least from mine. So there hasn't been a me for a very long time. That's been a problem. So one of the key factors in doing this was to fill posts and build a pragmatic structure that was going to get a proper team, a stable team in place as quickly as possible. Also within that was shaping the decision-making, the proposals, was the need to deliver the police and crime plan. I mean, there's quite a big job of work to do. There's a lot of work being done, but, we've still got quite a long way to go, and we want to move with that as quickly as possible. So that was one of the key factors in shaping this up. And I suppose the third key factor was keep costs to a minimum. Ensure that we're quite a lean office, that we're not spending unnecessarily. So, bearing those things in mind, broadly speaking, what we have is a couple of teams. Broadly speaking, two teams within the OPCC, and one team is structured around delivering change in a project management format. So, what you'll see is a team that's described as change. Relationships and partnerships, and broadly speaking, the drive of that team is to deliver all of the elements within the police and crime plan, ensure that we're on track with them, that we're delivering them, that we're measuring milestones, and that we're up to date in pursuing the objectives in the plan. That's one element of the structure that we've put in place. The other is at the same time to ensure that we deliver the core functions of the OPCC, and that we fulfil the requirements of scrutinising the work of the police, that we review all the audit requirements, that we undertake work and engagement, and so on. I'm not saying there isn't crossover between the two, there clearly is, but that's broadly how we've shaped it up. In terms of the savings, I inherited a structure that I'm not entirely sure if it's been before you before, but it costed out at around about £950,000. Some of those posts have changed. So you'll see that structure in Appendix A. Appendix A was the structure that we were trying to appoint to when I arrived. Some of those posts were not possible to put in place, so particularly the communications and engagement manager we advertised for twice, we couldn't get, and in bearing that in mind, that generated some of the changes that I've proposed. The resources manager, or the post that supports the finance director, that post has been reduced a level to save money, and one of the posts, the assurance officer, has been deleted. That made some savings. Obviously, within that, there were some other posts added to the arrangement, not least of which was the partnerships officer and the project officer to support the arrangements I've just described. In total, that generated a saving of around about £23,000. It's now around about £927,000 for all of the paid employees within the office. I don't really want to say any more than that. Happy to answer any questions that you've got, but that's the structure. We haven't appointed to all those posts, by the way. You see the table under paragraph 11 describes where we're at in that process, so we've still got a fair way to go to appoint those posts. The unfortunate thing was, as we discussed earlier, saying the finance director starting on the 29th of January. That's not the case, as we've discussed already. That's on an interim. That's on a what was the term used? Familiarisation basis until the confirmation hearing is held here. That aside, I will stop there and happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. I have Maronisa.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a general question to Lord Back. Given kind of the requirement and the commitment from a lot of public bodies, including the police, to look at diversity, given the geographical location that we're in terms of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, I suppose the question is to you. I know most of the posts have been filled, but there are a few that are vacant. What is it that you're trying to do to take steps to kind of reflect not only the diversity, but encourage that diversity within the PCC?
Well, I'm pleased to say, proud to say, that the OPCC is, the staff in the OPCCs are diverse in many particulars, not just ethnic mix, but in other ways as well. And I'm very proud of that. I'm obviously very concerned that, as far as the force is concerned, that we represent the community that they serve. And we do have a high proportion third highest proportion of ethnic minority police officers in the country, but both the Chief Constable and I are strongly of the view that at the moment that's not good enough and we have to improve. And I want to commend, if I may, even in his presence, which I don't normally do, Chief Constable for the work he's doing at the present time in order to make sure that we become even better at diversity in the round. I'm not just talking about a particular type of diversity. And you will have noticed that one of the extra posts that we are putting in is for positive action in that field. So it's a real priority for both the Chief Constable and myself. And I'm hoping my office represents what it is you're asking for. The Chief might want to say a word about that too.
We need to be more like the communities that we police. It's that simple. We're doing lots of work around that. In fact, panel members, you've got till midnight tonight to fill in the forms. There are currently ability to recruit, and you've just added 24 posts to that. So even now, there are some really excited people out there. The other thing I would say is today's the announcement of the Stonewall LGBT-friendly employer, and we're again in the top 100 employers in the UK in that. So we really value difference, and we are looking at how we can drive that forwards. The PCC has been hugely supportive. I'm chairing a goal group looking at recruiting and moving on now to retention because we need to get a talent pool that looks and sounds and feels like Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland in all its diverse glory. So we're doing lots of work on it. Big challenge. We've benchmarked ourselves externally, not just with Stonewall, but also with Race for Opportunity about gender and race, and we did pretty well with those, but we're not at all complacent. So we're kind of third best out of all the forces, but we need to benchmark better.
Alan, on the OPCC structure.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we be told what analysis, if any, has been done as to why it has been difficult to recruit to these posts in the past, and how does that compare with other commissioners' offices, and what assurance can we have that you will be able to retain the staff, if appropriate, once they've been recruited?
Can I start with the last one first, because that's probably the easiest. The retention within the team, so when we've appointed people, the retention rates are quite high. I'm looking to Angela here. I mean, this is slightly anecdotal. I haven't done the analysis, but my understanding of the throughput is that it's very low. So once we appoint people, we tend to retain them very well in the OPCC office. In terms of the appointments, it's hard to say. I think certainly one of the posts we tried to appoint to quite a high-level position with a kind of lower-level salary, and I think that probably made it quite difficult to get the right applicants. That was the communication post. A couple of posts we've tried to advertise for and not really had the right calibre of applicants, so they've been prolonged. But I think that's not a very full answer, to be honest. I think probably it requires more analysis and more reflection. I can come back to you on that and give you a fuller answer. But that's my immediate thoughts. We certainly have gone out for all the posts. We have advertised. We've done quite a wide trawl, and certainly for the posts of CFO, my post, gone out to through a lot of agencies to try and ensure that there's a wide spread that we're advertising in and drawing from. But for some of the other posts, I'm not entirely sure how widely they were advertised. I'd probably best to speak to Angela about that and reflect on it and come back to you if I can. Is that okay?
If you could email your answer to Ewan, Paul, and then Ewan will cascade it throughout the membership of the panel. Is that okay, Alan? Yep, okay. Any other comments on this paper at all? If not, recommendation at number 2, that the panel notes the revised structure. I'm very happy to propose that. All okay? Thanks very much. Right, we move on to the final paper, agenda item 9, cross-force collaboration between police forces in the East Midlands, report to the Secretariat. Interesting paper. I'm going to hand over to you and to introduce this paper to us. Thank you.
Yeah, so in paragraph 4 of your report, you will see the various areas where Leicestershire Police is involved with collaborative arrangements with other police forces in the region. So I'm sure if you need any more details on those particular arrangements, the Chief Constable will be able to provide details. Now, we've touched upon, over the years of this panel, we've touched upon looking at some of these areas. But the other police and crime panels in the region, so that's Northamptonshire, Lincolnshire, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, are very keen on having a closer look at these particular arrangements that are in place between the police forces in the region. And they're particularly keen at having a look at it in a more collaborative way. So rather than scrutinising these arrangements as part of the 5 individual police and crime panels, they're looking more coming together and doing more collaborative work on this. So what they're proposing, first of all, they held a seminar last year where officers from the other police and crime panels attended, along with some members of the other police and crime panels, and also Paddy Tipping was there, the Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Commissioner. And at that seminar, they started to look at what were the regional collaboration arrangements in place. And they're very keen to hold another seminar this year where they look at that again. And they have compiled a list of questions, which you'll find in the appendix to the report, which they are proposing to send to all the PCCs, the 5 PCCs in the region, to start to build up a picture of what are the cross-border arrangements amongst the force. So they're asking the chair of this panel to also send those questions to the Leicestershire PCC, Lord Bach. The other thing they're asking for is to twice yearly have on our individual police and crime panel agendas an agenda item on regional collaboration, and then feed that information back to the other panels in the region. So myself and the chairman have considered this, and we didn't attend the seminar which was held last year. The chairman felt it was more appropriate to concentrate on Leicestershire rather than the whole region. But some pressure has come from the other panels for us to be involved, so we thought it would be appropriate to bring it to the panel for yourselves to make a decision on exactly how closely you want to be involved with the other regions on scrutinising this. So the questions you'll have to decide is, do you want to continue to attend the seminar, which will be in 2018? How often would you like to have reports coming to the panel, this particular panel? Do you wish to be involved in any further closer arrangements where all the panels in the region may come together and try and scrutinise regional collaboration? So those are the decisions for you to make today.
Yeah, I'll just pop up straight away. When this all first started, the original invitation was for 5 members of this panel to go along to this seminar, also the PCC and also the Chief Constable. 7 people. Multiply that by 35 people. I just thought it was absolute overkill. Plus, they wanted money as well. It wasn't clear where the money's coming from. Money always tends to focus the mind a little bit. Some people do talk about it could come out the Home Office grant that this panel receives. Having said that, there are some people who say, no, it can't come out of that as well. That would have to be looked at by our legal bods at the appropriate time. I still see the panel's role here our focus is to support and to challenge our PCC, Lord Bark. Having said that, there is work going on between the 5 forces. and then also we have 5 panels. So the recommendations are a bit of a compromise, shall we say, to what maybe Nottinghamshire in particular want. That was my original stance, and I've got at this moment John wants to say something.
I'd like to ask the PCC a question, if I may. Most of the collaboration between forces appears to be at an operational level. Is there any collaboration between forces at the PCC level? Because clearly if there is, that is what we are here to scrutinise. So is there any cooperation other than at operational level?
Well, from my point of view, beyond the fact that we meet as a group and also on our own, and then also with the Chief Constables as well on a quarterly basis, and we talk about what the region is doing in terms of certain matters. No, really there isn't anything that compares to the operational purpose behind the work that the region is doing. So the answer is really no, there isn't.
In which case, Chair, putting it simply, we don't have a problem to scrutinise or resolve, and I think your recommendations on page 60 are perfect, and I move.
Comments from anyone else? If not, I'll second John's proposal. Oh, I'm going to suggest a small amendment. This is following conversation with Lord Bark on Monday afternoon, wasn't it? So I take you to 14B. Thank you, Ewan, for reminding me. 14B, that the PCC has been asked to submit 6 monthly reports. Following discussion with Lord Bark, I would like to amend that to an annual report because it is very slow moving. Is that satisfactory to everyone? Yep. Lord Bark?
Jack, could I just say on that that's what we do at the moment in terms of the annual report, but we do think that we probably could fill that out a bit more than we have in the past to give the panel more information than we do now. But I think that's very sensible. It's not my decision, but your amendment is sensible.
There will be a further paper on collaboration very shortly, won't there? We discussed that on Monday afternoon.
Yeah, there will be for the next meeting.
Okay, members. No one else has got the hand up at all. So you have a proposal from John for the recommendations, and I've seconded it with the amendment of annual report instead of 6 monthly. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you very much. We've had an urgent item from Manjula, so haven't been notified of any others. Just to say that the next meeting of the panel is scheduled to take place 28th of March, 1 p.m. at City Hall, Leicester. There will be no need for the additional meeting on the 19th of February 2018 as we pass the precept for the PCC. So thank you very much, members. 2-hour meeting, that's not bad for this panel. Wish you all a safe trip home. Thank you.